IGN is a joke? Is a joke?
Dude, God damn, dude.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. I'll watch it right now. How is that surprising to you? Because it had a 7. Because it had a fucking 7. Like, what do you mean? How do you... I'm not even sure about that. Yeah, didn't we already see this? No, I watched the one for, what was it called? Star Wars Outlaw. That's a different one. I'm going to take a look at it right now. Concord review. Okay.
Grab a copy of Overwatch off some dusty GameStop shelf and rub it under the musky armpit of the Guardians of the Galaxy's Peter Quill, and you might have something close to the feeling of Concord. As competitive hero shooters go, this sci-fi contender from Sony plays it quite safe. Complete with immediately charming characters rendered in...
Wait, what?
Quite safe. Complete with immediately charming characters rendered in...
I mean, like, did you, like, I mean, because haven't you read anybody's opinion about this other than what you think about it? And it's okay, you can give your review about it. But, like, you know, people are going to look at this. Are you kidding me? If it's so charming, like, you want to see what charming is? Well, I saw this post earlier today. Take a look at this. It says, playing Overwatch 2 with Mercy. My little brother, 15, walks in the game and stares at my screen and says, wait, she's from a game? That's what a charming character looks like. Not whatever the fuck, where is this? Why would anybody, like, this is, why would you want to do this? Just a big robot. It's just a trash can. Yeah, it's not even an interesting trash can. It's just literally a trash can. Here we go.
Characters rendered in gobsmackingly beautiful cutscenes and ability-based PvP combat that never addresses...
I mean, to be fair, the cutscenes were really good. It was impressively good how well put together they were and everything. Absolutely. Yeah.
Why those characters are fighting one another when they're clearly allies in said cutscenes. But just because it doesn't offer much in the way of innovation doesn't mean Concord isn't fun to play. I've sunk over 40...
Well, it does mean that the game isn't fun to play. So basically, one thing that does mean that it's not fun to play, is if you look at the player base of the game and nobody's playing the game. So, like, if a game was fun to play, you'd see more people playing the game. And you see this a lot with games that people like to say, oh, well, this game's actually really fun. And it's weird because you can have people that really want a game to be successful, but they don't really know how to, like, they're like so invested in it being good that they won't look at it from the perspective of anything other than their own. Yeah, like Helldivers? Yeah, kind of.
Very enjoyable hours into the sweaty shooter, and it overwhelmingly nails its class-based gunplay. That rock-solid foundation certainly carries it quite a long way, but with only a few by-the-numbers game modes and no killer features to shake up the genre, it still has a lot of growing to do during its live service evolution.
I don't think we're gonna get an evolution, okay? Like, there's some fish that, you know, they would crawl up onto the land, and they didn't know how to properly, you know, deal with oxygen. And so instead of evolving into land animals, they just died. And I think Concord is going to be one of those fish. It's going to get up, it's going to try to get and evolve out into, you know, making it on the land, and the legs aren't going to evolve, the gills aren't going to work, it's not going to understand what the fuck oxygen is. It's a bird with a weak beak, naturally selected out. It is. Yeah. It's not going to, this game is not going to evolve, man. It's already dead. Yeah, it's already done.
Your squad will form a 5-person team of super-powered characters. each with their own unique strengths, weaknesses, and special abilities.
Why would anybody want to be this? This is disgusting. This is weird. Like, this looks like a villain in Metroid Prime. Like, why would you think a hero shooter that, like, you got to compete with Overwatch? It's got to look like this? Is disgusting. What are you thinking?
And then bring them to bear against an opposing team in a variety of formulaic game modes. Those include a standard deathmatch mode, a kill confirmed mode called Trophy Hunt, and a zone control mode called Clash Point, to name a few, none of which possess even the slightest hint of novelty, but being overly familiar isn't necessarily a bad thing if you've got best-in-class gunplay and awesome characters with compelling powers to back it up.
That's true. You don't need to reinvent the wheel as long as the wheel is turning in a good way. That's right. Very accurate.
Boy, Concord has got both of those down pat. Concord sagely keeps its weapon selection very slim, with just one or two options given to each character by default, and no way to customize that. But the upshot here is that every single weapon feels incredibly responsive and finely tuned, and no two characters have weapons that feel at all similar. The arena-controlling old lady Duchess wields the submachine gun that's devastating at close range, while the sneaky and tactical Vale mostly relies on this long-range sniper rifle to take out enemies from afar.
I really think that IGN and some of these review websites need to realize that every time they try to put out a review that's basically a fluff piece on a game that was received badly by nearly the entire gaming audience, that they take what little degree of like credibility that they have and they cut it in half, right? Like you're cutting this, like it's like a tiny piece and you find a way to cut that little tiny piece in half. And that's what happens. So it's like, I think that if you don't, like, and I think it's very fair, like, there are people who have made reviews that were negative of games, but I think that some of the best negative reviews of games have actually stood the test of time and have been, like, profoundly, they've aged better than people would believe, right? Like the Zanzibar Forgive Me thing, or the Skill Up Final Fantasy 16 review. There have been people that have given very negative reviews to games, but after time goes on, people see the truth in that feedback.
While not all of these larger-than-life brawlers clicked with me immediately, like Cleaning Robot One-Off and his vacuum-based weapons that push and pull both enemies and gunfire around the map, or Baz and her knife-throwing and melee-focused ways. But given enough time with each of them, I was able to appreciate and even develop an affinity for this incredibly balanced and diverse roster of characters. All 16 options feel really good to use once you've figured out their tricks, and combining them with the 4 other characters on your team to serve a specific purpose, whether it be charitable support character, DPS king, or damage absorbing tank, is a lot of fun to play around with.
Wow. More happy customers.
Similarly, the abilities that complement their weapons are fantastic, diverse, and have very generous cooldowns, completely changing the way combat plays out depending on which character you're playing as. The floating fire...
I see this and it's just, like, there's no way that this shit could be true if the game only has, like, a few hundred players. Like, on Steam, like, there's just no way that it's this good. You know that it's not this. Anybody can see this. Diverse is a trigger word nowadays. Well, I think that he was not talking about, like, the way the characters look. I think he was just saying, like, some characters play with, like, a machine gun, other ones use a sniper rifle. I don't think he's talking about, like, oh, there's like a non-binary character. I don't think that's what he's referring to.
Ball chucking Haymar can blind opponents for a period of time and make them pay for standing in the same spot too long, while the rampaging ogre, Starchild, can close distances quickly with his charging attack and smash the ground to do heavy damage around him.
Wow.
Not all characters feel quite as original, like how Teo is the world's most generic soldier and comes equipped with a smoke grenade and cluster grenade as his 2 powers.
I don't see that as a problem. Like, that's the character for the people that play Call of Duty. Like, the idea of hero shooters is to have something for everybody that plays different games so people can feel like they can get into the game and try out something that they're familiar with. Like, of course you have John Concord. Like, you have, you need to have a Soldier 76. Like, and then you have the other characters that are like a melee character, kind of like Genji or Reinhardt or whatever that Star Child character is. That's the way that these games are designed. It's the way it's supposed to work.
And options are few and far between.
What are you doing?
Plus, they serve as an easy starting point for newcomers. Learning each character, using their abilities to counter the team comp of your opponents, and juggling the madness on the battlefield with top-notch gunplay was just as fun in my first match as it was in my 30th. And I certainly can't say I've felt that way about most hero shooters I've spent time with.
Man.
You'll have to get comfortable with the roster too, because one of the few novel twists Concord brings to the genre is the way its competitive playlist...
Let me just show this.
One of the few
like, if you look at this fire, for example, like a lot of the things in this game, especially some of the character design, it just looks pretty cheap, man. Like, it's weird that they spent so much money on cinematics and making the characters look semi-photorealistic, especially with, like, that Asian chick. But, like, they can't even nail down things like the fire like this too well. Yeah, so does Valorant? No, Valorant doesn't. Like, Valorant doesn't have a cheap look to it because it's stylized in a way that makes the lack of, like, detail look like it's intentional. And it has an art style that basically is congruent. With this, it doesn't have that. That's the difference.
Twists Concord brings to the genre is the way its competitive playlist, called Rivalry, works. Unlike the casual playlists, where you can choose whichever character you please, so long as someone else on your team hasn't already selected it, in Rivalry, you cleverly aren't allowed to select the same character again if you win a round while using them.
Yes, indeed.
Since matches go to the best of 7 rounds, that means winning one will push you to get outside of your comfort zone and use a minimum of 4 different characters.
See, like, I don't even know why you would do that. I mean, like, Overwatch, I think Overwatch has that with, like, some things, but in general, like, if people want to one-trick a character, let them one-trick a character. Like, for me, I like playing, like, maybe 2 or 3 different Overwatch characters, but if I had to play all of them, or, like, 5, 7 different characters, that would just be annoying to me. Like, because I understand the way the other characters are played, I just don't really like them that much. So it feels to me like, and I don't know about you guys that have played, like, you know, hero games like this before, where it's like, oh, now I have to play the character that I know I'm not as good at.
Not only is this a neat way to force people to master more than just 1 or 2 options, it also encourages communication with your team between rounds to ensure you've got proper coverage to play out whatever strategy you're trying to pull off as your options get slimmer. That choice is supported by another interesting wrinkle in Concord's character variants, slightly different versions of existing characters that come with a unique perk and an altered appearance, which can be unlocked by completing specific objectives during matches. For example, the gunslinger Lennox can normally reload his weapon by dodging, while the variant you can unlock for him loses that ability but gets more ammo for all of his weapons instead. Though each variant offers mostly minor changes.
To be fair to Concord, I think that's a cool idea. I mean, other games have variations of this too, but like having this that's kind of cool.
They definitely provide a meaningful thing to chase that offers more options in combat. Perhaps more importantly, they also
it just adds a little bit more depth to it, and it makes the characters more interesting. Now, obviously, the trade-off to that is that it makes it harder for newer players to understand, because you'll be fighting against a character, and you'll think that, because in a lot of games, obviously, the big difference between characters is like every Reinhardt basically looks the same in like Overwatch, but like imagine if you knew like Red Reinhardt could do like a fire attack instead of like his normal like seismic attack, right? Or something like that. Like his Earth Shatter wouldn't stun you, it would leave fire on the ground. Like, this would be kind of a good thing, but also kind of a bad thing. I'm kind of like back and forth about this, right? But, because it's a cool, like, metagame stuff, but it also hurts low-end players because it's confusing for them. Because there's skins that are like, okay, well, now you're using the skin. Is this skin for the normal character or the other character? Yeah. So maybe it is actually just a mess, but I like the idea of it at least.
Give you the opportunity to fudge the number.
In general, like anytime that somebody uses the excuse, like anytime that I hear somebody say that the way to solve a problem in a game that players are running into is to just get good at the game, I generally think that these are just ego gamers that don't really know what they're talking about. I don't really agree with that in almost all circumstances. I think most of the time when players are running into an issue where they hit a wall over and over, it's generally a lack of good design. And this is true like in any game, right? Like this is always how it is. Mostly how it is. Yeah, absolutely.
A bit in Rivalry, since variants count as separate characters on your crew and therefore let you play as the same characters in multiple rounds. With 16 likable characters front and center, you'd think story would be a major focus, but sadly, this is an area that's woefully lacking. With just 2 cutscenes right now to flesh out small bits of lore, Concord's strategy is to slowly drip feed players with short snippets of story over a long period of time.
Well, here's the thing, right, is that Overwatch was really popular because it had archetypes of people that were like, they had like really hot characters, basically. And it had these like kind of fantastic versions of characters, whereas Concord just kind of has your generic, I mean, this is your generic everyman, this is your generic John Concord, and this is your generic hot Asian girl that's in the game, right? Like, that's basically about it. Like, if you go and you look at Overwatch, for example, all the characters are super stylized, they're really hot, you know, like, it's just, you know, that's the way that I see it. I think that's a big reason why the game fell off, is because hero shooters, I think, do, especially in terms of like making people interested in the characters have to look appealing, and I just don't think these characters look appealing at all.
Let's establish roots, class.
Subsidized by the Galactic Guide, a map filled with nodes where you can read about the locations and characters. I've spent a fair bit of time scrolling through this sizable library of short descriptions, and though much of it is well written, it's a pretty poor substitute for in-game storytelling that I worry won't come often enough to keep me invested.
Well, like, Overwatch had a great form of storytelling, and it had the same form of storytelling that like some things in like Dark Souls have. Where like Overwatch had like these, like you would have like pre-game lobby and like post-game lobby in some circumstances, and in between rounds you would have like these spontaneous lore drops where like one character would say something to another character if they were both in the same lobby, and it would be like, oh, okay, now I have like this extra piece of the lore that makes the world more interesting, right? And it's the same as like, you know, if you encounter, you know, a boss in WoW with like a certain weapon on, right? Like there'll sometimes be like a certain, like Atiesh, if you had the staff, people will be like, oh my God, well, where'd you get the staff? And like they had Hanzo and Genji still, it's super hard. It does, right? And so like you had this spontaneous storytelling that was drip fed to you in like a way that made it like dynamic and interesting, and you never knew what was going to happen or when it was going to happen, because it wasn't like a guaranteed chance that we're going to see the same thing every time. Even Marvel Rivals did that. Yeah, because it's smart. Of course. Yeah.
Characters squandered by a complete lack of narrative is basically a hallmark of the hero shooter genre at this point, but it definitely doesn't get any easier to swallow that especially bitter pill. If developer Firewalk sticks with building out the galaxy over time, it could end up being a major draw. But for now, it's
never going to happen. I think that the best thing that Sony can do is to end this as soon as possible. Because, like, and this is the problem, is that a player base's first impressions are so important that if you mess up that first impression, you never really get the second chance. And I think that's what happens more than anything, is that second chance doesn't happen. First impression is broken. People see, oh, bad game, and then they never think about it again. No Man's Sky? Yeah, but think about how many years that took in order to develop and how much money they had to invest into doing that, and then multiply the scope of No Man's Sky into Concord, and then look at it from Sony's perspective versus just the small studio that only has No Man's Sky to base off of, right? It's like, yeah, No Man's Sky is a great example, but the truth is that No Man's Sky is a massive survivorship bias example. Like, the vast majority of games that try to, like, redeem themselves don't really redeem themselves. Like, you can look at, I don't know, like Diablo 4, I think, is a good example, right? Is that Diablo 4 has improved a lot of the problems that they had since launch, but because people are fatigued from the problems that they had from the game from launch, that they're not coming back to play it again. Cyberpunk, it took them until 2.0 to really reset that fatigue. And that was because, again, CD Projekt Red is an individual studio, and, you know, they have to do what they have to do. But I think a lot of cases this should learn from Artifact. Maybe, yeah, first impression's important. It's the most important. And so after people already have decided that they don't like something, it's very hard to get them to change their mind. Like, I've noticed this a lot with video games, is that if a trailer for a game comes out and the first trailer is good or bad, people will very rarely change their opinion based off of that until actual gameplay comes out because of how strong first impressions really are.
Extremely thin, and also quite disconnected from the PvP action you spend all your time with. And a pretty big waste of a cast that has lots of potential.
Set your expectations low.
Concord's game modes are much less inspired than its characters as well. Of the 6 currently available, none of them possess more than a modicum of originality. For example, Signal Hunt is a King of the Hill mode where you fight to control one spot on the map until it moves elsewhere, and Area Control is, well, a zone control mode where you fight over control of 3 static zones.
All kinds of games have stuff like this. This is not, in my opinion, none of this has anything to do with like the quality of the game. It will have no effect on it at all.
None of these milquetoast ideas are especially offensive. It certainly highlights a major issue with Concord, a lack of any signature game mode that sets this hero shooter apart from the other options out there. Love it or hate it, Overwatch's spin on its iconic escort mode made it a defining selling point, even if that idea was admittedly borrowed from Team Fortress 2 before it. Meanwhile,
and yeah, Team Fortress 2 probably didn't invent that idea either. I bet there was a game before Team Fortress 2 that used that idea as well. Like the idea of capture the flag or like some other variation of that. This is so old. Like every game has had stuff like this since games have existed. So yeah, it's not like this is some kind of a new thing. The problem is not a lack of innovation, it's a lack of quality. It's always a lack of quality.
Concord has a handful of the world's most generic modes I intrinsically understood and was preemptively bored by before I even played them. That's a pretty big miss for a hero shooter that already badly lacks ways it sets itself apart. The 12 designed maps shake out a lot better than the bland game modes though, and I largely enjoy running around Concord's arenas, which feature lots of zigs and zags, cover mechanics, complex pathing that requires spending time learning the map, and some routes that only more mobile characters can easily reach due to the pretty intense heights the vast majority of the stages reach.
Man.
On the waterlogged planet of Leviathan, you'll fight inside of giant dead sea creatures in the water hazard map and battle through labyrinthine hallways in the shock risk map. While on the dying planet of Akar, you'll blast.
What's so crazy to me about some of these reviews is that they don't even address any of the criticism that the game's received for the past like 2 or 3 months. And I'm not talking about like pronouns of like the characters, but like it's just the characters not looking good or anything. And it's just it's like these things, they exist in a vacuum, right? It's basically, yeah, it feels like this is like a PR ad for like Sony or something like that. It doesn't even feel like it's a review.
Enemies to bits as you dance around the skeletal remains
That's
of some
insane.
long-forgotten kaiju. Really, my only issue is that some of these maps are a tad larger than 5v5 combat calls for, and that means it can take quite a long time to get back in the action after each respawn. Aside from that though, I've had a great time figuring out the best paths and team strategies across each arena.
Verdict. Okay, here we go.
Concord isn't the most innovative or content-heavy hero shooter you could play, but with such fantastic competitive gameplay, 16 compelling characters to master, and 12 well-designed maps, it's got the makings of something that could go the distance in the months and years to come. In fact, it's a testament to its FPS chops that even while it has a virtually non-existent story and a serious need for a signature game mode, I still found myself losing dozens of hours to its PvP charms. Hopefully the live service roadmap will do its thing and show this promising shooter the love it needs to become something truly special. But right now, it's at least good enough for me to recommend.
I thought he was joking. I did. I thought it was some kind of selective editing thing. Mudahar was talking about another video when it wasn't Concord, or somehow it was like different. Like, I didn't really believe that. I did not believe. How could you do this? How could you do that? Like, Wukong is an 8, Concord is a 7. So let me get this straight. On a scale of 1 to 10, like, I don't. How is this even possible? I don't even understand it. It's so confusing to me.
And trying out.
They also
For
gave
more, check out
Dustborn
our
a 7.
recent reviews of Star Wars Outlaws and Black Myth Wukong.
Did they
and for
really?
everything else, stick with IGN.
Man, I really think that they need to understand that whenever you're giving favorable reviews to games that clearly have these massive problems inside of the community, and you don't even address any of the problems, you pretend like they're not real, you don't even talk about them, what you're doing is like, you're cutting your credibility in half, and if you do that enough times, you're not going to have enough to rely on when, you know, actually this has already happened to IGN. IGN is probably the best out of all of them, I think. And I still think IGN has a huge amount of problems, right? But it is probably the best reviewer out of all of them. And even they do like this weird lip service. You know what I think a lot of this is? This is what I'm worried about. I'm worried that these game reviewer companies aren't even doing it because it's like, oh, they're doing it because they're trying to push DEI on us. You know what I'm really worried about? I'm worried about the possibility that they're doing it because they're worried that if they don't give it a good review, Sony could not give them access to future products. That's what I'm really afraid of, because that's what I think is happening more than anything else. That's the really scary thing. And ACG and Scope are the best. Here's what you should do, right? Is there a significant gameplay difference between Concord and Overwatch? I don't know. I mean, like, visually, it looks pretty similar. I mean, I'm sure there are differences, but overall, it really just kind of depends. So that's exactly what's happening, right? Yeah, and so these people are giving favorable reviews towards, I think, studios that they, maybe they want to have like future favors for or something like that. But this came out a day ago. It has less than 1,000 likes. The gap between an IGN 7 and an IGN 8 must be greater than Mount Everest. More people watched this review than bought the... That is actually true. Yeah, that's probably unironically true. Yeah, I don't even know what to say.